Great. Well, thank you again, Dr. Qumsiyeh, for being on. I'm just going to read some of your bio, if that's okay, so people can get to know a little bit of the context of where you're coming from, because I find your work and your activism and your academic, like intellectual work, so fascinating and amazing. Um, Professor Mazin Qumsiyeh served on the faculties previously at University of Tennessee, where I'm from, Duke, and Yale Universities. He and his wife returned to Palestine in 2008, starting a number of institutions and projects, and now they run as full-time volunteers the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, or PIBS, at Bethlehem University. Dr. Qumsiyeh has published over 160 scientific papers, over 30 book chapters, and several books on topics ranging from cultural heritage to human rights to biodiversity conservation to cancer. Most recently publishing the book Popular Resistance in Palestine, A History of Hope and Empowerment. He's also published hundreds of articles and letters to the editor, and has an activism book published electronically. He's given talks in, this is probably more than this now, 45 countries around the world. The programs he and his wife created impact thousands. He also serves on the board of a number of Palestinian youth and service organizations. The Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University has become an oasis for visitors to Palestine from around the world. And I can attest to that, having been fortunate to visit back in March. For his service, community, and nonviolent resistance, he's received many awards. He's also been, for the same actions, arrested and harassed. He and his wife and dozens of other volunteers at PIBS continue to have, quote, joyful participation in the sorrows of this world and make a real difference for sustainability of nature and human communities. That's just, I know it's just a sample of what you've done. But I would love Dr. Qumsiyeh to start our conversation in talking about your most recent tour. I think you were in New Zealand, and I would love to hear about some of the conversations that you've been having as you travel the world, and what's coming up for you right now in this moment. You know, particularly in the United States, we're approaching a visit from Netanyahu. We are in the middle of a crazy election. What is coming up for you as you have these talks and meet with people around the world?
Well, thank you for doing this. Yes, we are talking at very unusual times in world history, where there's an ongoing genocide being cheered on and supported by a number of Western governments, primarily the United States and the United Kingdom, as well as the government of Australia and a few other governments. Now, as I travel around the world speaking about these things, and I find remarkable the disparity and the gulf between what the governments stand for and what the people stand for. The people certainly do not stand for racism, genocide, ethnic cleansing, murdering tens of thousands of children and women. There's one estimate that just in the last 9 months, over 186,000 Palestinians were killed. 72% of them are children and women. So we live at very extraordinary times. Now, when you mention I traveled, yes, I traveled to Australia and Aotearoa, as they call it, New Zealand. These countries, I really don't like to travel, to be honest. I like to stay in my country, even if it means death in this country, yes. Death is all around us, So a little context here may be appropriate, and again, it's not the issue. It is an issue of understanding where we are at this moment in history, and it is, as I said, an extraordinary moment where the United States Congress, both Democrats and Republican leadership, is inviting the Hitler of our era, Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, Milowski. He was from Poland originally. He came here as a colonizer with his family, and they ended up rising in power because of the level of vitriol and racism that his family exhibits towards indigenous people of Palestine. His father was actually an assistant to a guy by the name of Vladimir Jabotinsky, who also came to Palestine as a colonizer. And Jabotinsky, had a very interesting ideology about how to deal with the situation. He says, as colonizers, we cannot expect that the colonized people would accept us in any way. And in any way, even if they accept us, we don't want that. We want a country for ourselves, and we don't want these people. So we have to achieve colonization by this, what he called an iron wall. The iron wall is of bayonets, whether they are Jewish Zionist bayonets, as he said, or British bayonets. And so he got support from the British government. And he was recognized by later by many groups as an international terrorist, including the British government listed him as a terrorist because he also started attacking the British forces here after, they helped him. This is biting the hand that helps you. But anyway, I'm sorry if I'm kind of, at this moment, you asked me what my thinking is. My thinking is there's a US Congress inviting a war criminal, a Hitler of our age, as I said, to Washington, D.C., a guy who has blood of Palestinian children in his hand, who has an indictment against him at the International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice that's just ruled that basically what Israel is doing in the occupied territory is contrary to international law, is illegal, basically, adding to the legal weight, saying that this is a criminal rogue regime of apartheid, similar to what existed in South Africa under apartheid. And yet Congress and both candidates for President Trump and Biden seem to support this genocide and fund it and participate in it, even with US boots on the ground. We can talk about that if you want. But this is actually happening. And Congress is just passing a new resolution that will make even criticism of Israel illegal. They accepted the what's called International Holocaust Remembrance, whatever definition of Holocaust. This is a Zionist group that includes criticism of Israel as basically anti-Semitic acts. But they can pass any laws they want in Congress because pretty much Washington is also Israeli occupied territory, just like where I'm speaking from, Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, is Israeli occupied territory.
Mm. Wow. You wrote um, in one of your newsletters, which really caused me to reach out to you, that I've been following, and I'm so appreciative of them. But you wrote that this is um, the moral test of our time. And I specifically am curious if you can tell me about um, what are some of the elements to keeping our morality as human beings. I mean, there's something here to be said for the invitation of Netanyahu. There's something to be said about both candidates supporting him, but there's also a mass movement like we haven't seen before in support of Palestine. What do you think are the elements and the resources that we need to tap into to keep our humanity, to keep our morality in times like these, in these extraordinary times?
And the American historian Howard Zinn once wrote a book saying, "You can't be neutral on a moving train." And this is, I'm reminded of this with your question. The train is moving and it's heading off to a cliff, basically. And this train is imperialism, colonialism, racism, is bringing us to the brink of another global war. And this time, this global war will not leave winners and losers, human winners and losers. It will leave basically cockroaches as the only winners because they will be resistant to nuclear radiation. And the people who are driving this train and pressing on the gas pedal for it, people like Biden or Trump or Netanyahu or those guys, they're oblivious and they don't care, as long as their pocketbooks are lined with money, they really don't care about humanity or the future of humanity. So what is our role when you ask yourself, what is my role as an individual? I think, I look back when I was active in the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa in the 1980s, although marginally, I was not a leader or anything. But marginally in the 1980s, I engaged in supporting the struggle in South Africa against apartheid. Why? Because it was the moral thing to do, number one. Number two, because it exposed Western hypocrisy. On the one hand, the West was saying that they support human rights and international law. And on the other hand, they were supporting and funding the most brutal regime of apartheid that existed at that time, which is South Africa, against the Black indigenous people of South Africa. So that hypocrisy that was exposed by South Africa, basically, and what's happening, and the Soweto uprising that basically lit the way for the world to see the brutality of the apartheid regime. I would say the same thing is happening now with the Gaza ghetto uprising, sort of like the Warsaw ghetto uprising also. These uprisings awaken the world to the brutality of such racist, genocidal regimes. So that is why I think it's important, and it's Gaza basically lights a way by exposing that Israel is a genocidal colonial state. But I think it's even more than what happened with South Africa or what happened during the Second World War with the Holocaust of Jews and Gypsies and communists and others. There were many genocides and holocausts in human history. Just one could name hundreds of them very quickly, from Armenian genocide to Tutsis and Houthis, and to Namibia, the Germans, to the Belgian genocide of the Congolese people, Japan and Manchuria, many other places. One can name all these genocides in human history, but this one seems to be unique. And I'll explain why I think it's unique and why this demands of us even more energy and more effort to stop it. One of the aspects of these previous genocides that is so obvious is that they were done by one government against another people. For example, the British government and with the Aboriginal people in Australia, or the Dutch settlers in South Africa, or the French in Algeria, and so on. This one is not done by one government. It's done by several governments, many governments, Western governments, working in collusion, and part of it is a network of Zionists supporting them and lobbying to achieve the results in those countries as they want them, making sure that Trump and Biden and any politician in the US only gets to power if they have permission of those Zionist lobbies. That's an interesting variation on the previous genocides in world history. The second variation that we note here is like, unlike previous genocides, this one is televised and recorded, available to anybody to see, anybody with access to YouTube or Facebook or Instagram or any internet tool can find out what's going on and see people literally videotaping genocide going on in Gaza. People starving to death, people even recording themselves being killed. I've seen videos of doctors even videotaping as they were shelled and killed. This is very unusual. It didn't happen in previous genocides, holocausts in human history. We had to speculate and we had to read text, but now everybody can see it. And so nobody can claim, well, I didn't know, what was going on. Everybody can easily know and easily knowable, and they do know it. And anybody who tells you they don't know what's going on are either lying to you or lying to themselves. And then, the other thing that I would say, that's third thing that's unique about this genocide, is it's happening in a period in world history. We're talking about 2024, for Christ's sake. This is an era where technology is so advanced. We have nuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs, supersonic missiles, laser technology in space that could obliterate whole cities. And yet the mentality of the leaders leading us in this genocide is still fixated on the old, zero-sum game that they can proceed to kill and get away with it. And they don't understand that the next war, as I said, will not be winnable. That makes it very, very dangerous, of course, and we already see a regional war that already started, and regional wars historically led to global wars, as we saw in First World War, Second World War, or before that, the Crimean War, which was another world war. So these three things make this situation that we are witnessing, we are living through as humans, really, really dangerous and unprecedented, and demands everybody be involved to stop it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That was a quite a history lesson too, and just you breaking down the different genocides that have happened. I want to talk a little bit about ecocide and that term, and I'm curious how you might define that and the impacts that you're seeing through your work at PIBS on the land and the natural resources of Palestine.
Well, if we put Palestine in historical context of other countries that were colonized, Palestine now has total population of Palestine is 15 million Palestinians in the world. Most of them are outside the country, actually. Most of them are refugees or displaced people, 8 million of 15 million Palestinians. And the rest that remain here, like the people of Gaza, who themselves are 70% are refugees. Those people who remain here within historic Palestine are subjected to genocide. This in the context of other colonial situations, you can do comparative analysis. As a scientist, I like to do comparative analysis. You see that all colonizers damage the environment. In fact, I don't know of a single colonization, at least a displacement settler type of colonization. There's now people talk of economic colonization, other kinds of things. But the displacement settler colonialism, variety of it, be it the Europeans colonizing North America and South America, or colonizing Australia and Aotearoa, or so-called New Zealand, now called New Zealand, or many other countries, South Africa, many other countries, you see that destruction of the indigenous communities was not limited to the human indigenous communities. It also involved the indigenous fauna and flora. This is the ecocide. This is destruction of the environment. And you saw it in North America, for example, when the Europeans killed 2 to 3 million buffaloes, changed courses of rivers, introduced invasive species. Same thing with Australia, by the way, much of its fauna was decimated by European invasions. So environmental catastrophe is what it is part and parcel of colonialism. And if we take it for Palestine, this was also the case, perhaps even worse than other countries. Why do I say this? Because Palestine was actually a heaven on earth before the Zionist colonization. It's part of the Fertile Crescent where humans first developed agriculture. It's a land bridge between Africa and the rest of the world. That's where humans migrated to the rest of the world, happened through this land bridge through Palestine. And many of our ancestors did not continue migrating to Europe and other countries, but settled here 100,000 years ago and developed very sustainable forms of living. Pastoralism and agriculture were first invented here in Palestine and in the Fertile Crescent as a whole. That's why this Fertile Crescent is called the cradle of civilization. It's where civilizations originated, where the first laws, first music, first alphabet, which happens to be the same alphabet you use today in the US or Europe or anywhere else. This is the Phoenician Aramaic alphabet from our ancestors, Canaanitic people. So Palestine was heaven. And what did the Zionists do to this heaven? They wrecked it, they destroyed it, not only for the indigenous people by ethnically cleansing us and destroying 530 Palestinian villages and communities that existed for thousands of years, But they also did some other horrible things, like, for example, destroying all the trees, not all of them, but millions and millions of trees that surrounded these villages and towns. They uprooted those trees, indigenous trees, whether domesticated plants like olives and figs and almonds, but also wild trees like oaks and hawthorn and carob. They bulldozed all of those. To replace them, they planted Jewish-only colonies, and also sometimes they planted trees. And what are those trees they planted? They planted a monoculture of European pine trees, Pinus halepensis, to give the country a European look. This was devastating for our environment, and of course destroyed biodiversity and destroyed sustainability. These pine trees are also, because they are more adapted to European climates, cold climates in Northern Europe. Here in a dry climate, they are susceptible to fires. So we've been having fires in the Galilee and Western Jerusalem areas where they planted these artificial forests, a monoculture to replace a polyculture. The colonizers, the Jewish colonizers here, also diverted the Jordan River basin, dried it up basically. So the river used to flow at 1,350 million cubic meters per year. Now it's down to only 20 million cubic meters per year. And that means it's not a river anymore. It's a tiny polluted stream that you could walk across or even jump across. This has been devastating to wildlife, to people. I could go on and on about the impact of colonizers on the environment in our country. But as indigenous people, of course, the remaining population tries to survive. Before 1948, 95% or 93% of the population lived off of either sustainable agriculture or pastoralism. Now less than 4% of the population lives from sustainable agriculture and pastoralism. The rest are unemployed or living off charity or working in service as indentured laborers for the colonizers.
Mm. Um, where does the work of PIBS come in? How are you inspired to start this? And I know that you're running it as volunteers. Um, what inspired you to begin this work, and what's some of the challenges that you're facing currently?
Well, I am in my 60s and I have been active all my life since I was born. Actually, I've been active because being born in this country is also a form of resistance. Because, as I said, colonizers want the land, they don't want the people who come with the land, and they try to kill us and they try to drive us out. And they succeeded to a large extent with a large portion of our people. But anyways, being to the land from my childhood and the teachings of my family, my uncle who was a biologist who used to take me with him when I was a child to the field to study nature. I developed a love of the land, a love of the people of the land, a love of indigenous communities and how they survive against all odds. And here really I say against all odds, because as I said, it's not just the Zionists here that we are facing. We're facing the US, the might of the United States and the United Kingdom and France and many other countries. So this is what energizes me is, but on the other hand, come to think of it, it's also not a matter of choice. You don't have much of a choice to be active, so to speak, to do things, because what else can you do? You don't have the luxury of despair. You don't have the luxury of giving up. If you give up, you might as well commit suicide. So you have to act and you have to do something. And each of us acts in their own capacity and their own abilities. Artists do art, or musicians, music, poets write poems. Scientists like me who love nature do research in nature and do protection of nature, do publicity, as you see in my messages, things like that. So one of those methods of acting for me was me and my wife started this institute called Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, which has a vision of sustainable human and natural communities in Palestine. And we've been, I would say, tremendously successful, considering the circumstances, of course, doing this as volunteers. I'm volunteer full-time, 7 days a week, 16 hours a day. My wife is same. We have other volunteers even living here, eating from the ground produce that we grow. Today we harvested some grapes and made grape juice and things like that. So we try to live off the land. We try to survive against, as I said, incredible odds. But it is what activism is what keeps us sane, actually, in the face of these incredible odds.
And what are some of the projects or initiatives that maybe you've recently started where you all need some support? Because I can only imagine working 16 hours a week as a volunteer, uh, how
16 hours a
sustainable.
day.
16 hours a
Seven,
day, right? Thank you for correcting me. Um,
right.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, I mean, okay, so I mentioned the vision of the Institute.
Uh-oh. Dr. Qumsiyeh, can you hear me? I think we lost it. Okay, may have to rejoin. Okay, hopefully he'll come back on. Mm, check my email. Okay. Okay, Dr. Qumsiyeh, it looks like you may be back.
Yeah. Can you see me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I was saying the internet on my office went off. That also is a gift of colonization. So I'm speaking to you now on my cell phone. I hope it's equally good, at least image and voice. And I see you're back recording, so I don't know where it cut off exactly, but I'll repeat a little bit that in terms of what we do for things, research, because knowledge is essential for all what we do to protect our environment, to protect our people. Second thing is education. And education, like we have children coming to our institute every day, also university students and normal people, backgrounds, various backgrounds, internationals come here. We educate them about what's going on and how they can make a difference. That's empowering education or learning about environment and about sustainability. The third thing that we do is conservation, direct conservation on the ground. So our projects in this arena include things like protecting endangered species, helping marginalized communities, for example, Bedouins or villages near the wall survive, helping them plant trees, helping them survive against the incredible onslaught on their lives and livelihoods. And the fourth thing, which is related to that third thing, is that community service in general. Community service includes like empowering women by showing them how they can make products, organic products, and market them. We help them in feeling, and practicing their rights and push for their rights. All the marginalized communities, not just women, like also the elderly, the handicapped, the children, marginalized communities, they need support and they need this. So these are four arenas of our work, and our projects are focused around those. And of course, we welcome volunteers from around the world. We've received volunteers from more than 45 countries so far. We now have several international volunteers and several local volunteers even today on a Sunday. So we have that ability to help people if we help ourselves, basically, first of all, empowering ourselves, empowering our volunteers to do what's right for themselves and for their communities. So volunteering, lending support from abroad, even you can volunteer from abroad by working with us on projects, whether it's research projects, education projects, or community service projects. We welcome donations, of course, and people can learn more about all these things and how they can help on our website, which is palestinenature.org, palestinenature, one word, .org.
Wonderful. Um, I want to ask you about resistance and resilience, and you mentioned is such a beautiful statement of being born in Palestine is its own resistance. But how do you maintain resiliency, having faced your own threats and been arrested, and knowing that the work that you do is so critical, but also quite vulnerable? How are you finding places to regain your resilience, and what keeps you motivated and keeps you going in this work personally?
Well, as I said, we don't have the luxury of despair. We have to keep going. And so I stay busy and staying busy itself is avoids me ending up in a mental institution, if you want. So you stay busy, you stay helping. The more you help, the more your spirit is lifted because you feel empowered, of course. So I urge people to become involved in activism because activism actually is a form of therapy and is a form of ability to cope with our circumstances. The Buddhists have a saying, to have joyful participation in the sorrows of this world. And the key word here is participation, joyful participation. So you participate. You cannot isolate yourself. You cannot go hide under a table like they were telling the American children to do in case of a nuclear attack. It does not help. You have to be involved. You have to change your circumstances. And you do have power. People do have powers. And I think the biggest element that the powers to be try to force us to think is that people don't have powers. And that's not true. People have power. Even oppressed people have power. During slavery, of course, you still have choices. People still had choices. They can either be field slaves or house slaves. And people have resisted and continued to resist against all odds, sometimes Native Americans, for example, others. That insistence on doing what's right against all odds is what keeps us human, actually. And I say this, the colonizers, the oppressors, no matter who they are, whether it's and during the Jim Crow laws in the south of the US, they want to dehumanize people, and they want people to feel dehumanized. And they want to first and foremost colonize our minds before they colonize our bodies. So Stephen Biko from South Africa once said during apartheid, he said, the best weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And in the civil rights movement in the US, they used to have a saying, free your mind and your ass will follow. So I think, we have to really work on our own minds first. And this mental liberation is surely to be followed by physical liberation. And I find this mental colonization infecting a lot of people, including the colonizers themselves, by the way. They're mentally colonized, and they need to decolonize their minds from the racism, from the sense of chosenness, manifest destiny, shiny city on the hill, all that nonsense that they brainwashed their children to believe that they're good and what they have done is good and that it's even good for the natives. Hey, we had corn and turkey with them. That's how Thanksgiving came. They don't tell us that Thanksgiving was a holiday created to thank the Lord for letting us butcher those savages that are attacking us for no obvious reasons. We're just defending ourselves, circling the wagons. So I think, people need to decolonize their own minds, and this includes both the oppressors and the oppressed. And also many people don't even know that they are oppressors. American taxpayers, for example, many of them think, well, it's not my business what's happening in this other part of the world. They don't realize that their government is spending trillions, literally, of money of their taxes to engage in endless wars that benefit a very, very small minority, tiny elite minority that's profiting from wars.
Yes. Well, can you talk a little bit about your book, Popular Resistance in Palestine, and I'm curious any other projects, writings that you might be working on. I mean, you're always writing and doing research, but I'd love to hear if there's anything else on the horizon. Um,
Yeah, I wrote a book called Popular Resistance in Palestine, A History of Hope and Empowerment. This book was actually one of my most rewarding books that I've written. To me, psychologically, it helped me to review the history of popular resistance, which that's how we call it. In Arabic, we call it مقاومة شعبية, which translates into popular resistance. We don't use the words nonviolent resistance for the same reason that Mahatma Gandhi refused to use that term as negative term, and he preferred to use the positive terms of satyagraha and ahimsa, things like that. But anyways, I wrote this book about popular resistance in Palestine. Over 140 years of resistance. I was telling, really inspiring stories of success of popular. It's sort of like the Howard Zinn's book called People's History of the United States. I wrote a People's History of Palestine. In follow-up to that, that book was published in 2012, so 12 years ago, and translated to many languages in 2014. But anyways, in follow-up, I did two other books, kind of tardied on them, and now I'm getting them done finally. Both relate to expanding on this issue. One is to expand on inspiring stories of resistance from more recent eras, like my village of Beit Sahur, the Shepherd's Field, where we engaged in popular resistance in the 1980s and 90s, where we have refused to obey military orders, challenged the colonizers, in many, many ways, innovative ways sometimes, where we mobilized the international communities to join us and support us, and where we started the international solidarity movement in my village, basically, and how the international solidarity movement mushroomed. These are important stories to tell. And people love to read stories. We are by nature, humans love to hear stories. This is going back to our times as hunter-gatherers sitting in the caves over fire, telling stories. So we inspire people by telling each other stories. Our stories, other people's stories. I was inspired by some of the things I was told in my travels in the United States. For example, many of the indigenous people communities, First Nations in the US, of resistance, and resilience of the people there against all odds. Again, I think we need to hear each other's stories. We need to support each other as people who have been oppressed around the world, people of color, people from the global south. We can make a difference. And I believe it starts with these writings and stories and images. I mean, I was also reviewing for my other book, which is about activism and how to do activism, which will also be done this year. Lessons of activism and how the Zionist movement tries to suppress our activism. I was targeted, as were many others, for our activism, even though our activism is all nonviolent, writing and speaking and engaging in boycott, divestment, sanctions, how we were targeted, how we were denied jobs and contracts and other things, how we were jailed sometimes, things like that. I think there are lessons to be learned from that.
Certainly. Um, I'm wondering if you and if uh, Leah and Phoenix, if you have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat, but or come off mute. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more, Dr. Qumsiyeh, about the political consequences that we're up against, particularly in the United States, being a major imperial player in this settler colonial project, and the genocide that's ongoing, being the funder and the backer of that. Can you talk about what do you see as some of the real consequences that we face currently, and maybe what is your outlook on? You say that this, will turn into a war that I think you said maybe it's not winnable. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm curious about your own political analysis and how do we assess where we are so that we can better position ourselves and not have to be in this situation, hopefully, again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we take the United States, which is, I also, I went to the US first in 1979, and I lived more than 25 years in that country, and I got US citizenship. And in some way, I felt fairly guilty being partaking of the privilege of colonizers' heritage in the US by getting good education in the US and getting good jobs, etc. As you mentioned earlier, I was a professor at universities like Tennessee, Duke, and Yale. But anyways, so that's what, 1979 until today, we're talking about more than 45 years. This 45 years of association with the US and studying the US, I learned a bit about the history of the United States and how it came about, and some of it before 1979 I never understood. That's why I also encourage people to travel, because visiting the US in 1979 to get my master's degree is different than reading about it or watching Hollywood films and things like that, which were, of course, very highly distorted. So understanding the US at a deeper level by visiting it and traveling throughout it, and I've traveled in all 48 continental states. The only two states I haven't visited are Alaska and Hawaii. So I knew American society, US society very, very well, understanding what is going on in terms of politics and society, civil society, activism, civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter movements, all these things, Occupy Wall Street movement that I participated in, allowed me to make, I'm just telling you, I can make some reflections. By no means, I'm an expert on US, but certainly this allows me to make some observations. One observation I can make is that the US is a very heterogeneous society with amazing people that are active, that are doing what's right. But the US also includes some amazingly, how should I describe it, racist and genocidal individuals that have no compunction about killing civilians and seem to enjoy it. This was revealed, for example, in WikiLeaks videos of targeting people in Iraq from Apache helicopters and things like that, or what happened in Vietnam, for example. or what happened to indigenous people in the US, First Nations, and the genocide committed against them, or what happened to Black Americans, African Americans, and how they were treated both before slavery ended, after slavery ended, and even after winning, so to speak, the civil rights movement in the 1960s, racism continues unabated. So there's this tremendous diversity in the United States. However, the political system in the United States is not a democracy. This I say, very openly and honestly. I studied it very well. There is no democracy in the US. There is power of the money. Who has the money determines the outcome. That's why we end up with people like Bloomberg being mayor of New York or Trump being president of the United States. This is not about people believing in those people or whatever. It's about the power of money in politics and special interests in politics. And this applies to both major political parties, the duopoly in the US. When I realized this first time in the US after I became a US citizen, I started voting for third parties like the Green Party, because there's no hope in the, for example, Democratic Party. You see what they did for Bernie Sanders, for example, who was, clearly could have won hands down, not even with a small margin, with a big margin against Donald Trump. And he was leading in all the primaries in the Democratic Party. And then the deep state and the deep pockets of the Democratic Party told them to dump him and put Biden to run. So that's basically what happens in US politics. If there is a silver lining to this dark cloud of US politics, is the US from its founding has been a genocidal, warmongering state, and it rose as an empire in first century and a half, and then it had its other century, so it's 250 years old. For 150 years, they were small and rising in power. And then they had what's called the American century. The American century really started in the early 20th century, and now it's ending in the early 21st century. And whether it's Biden or Trump overseeing perhaps the last of the emperors, sort of like Neron, and watching Rome burn, and that's what is going to happen, because the American public is given this illusion of democracy that they have a choice between Trump and between Biden. That's not much of a choice, as just about everybody realizes, but they think that there is no other choice, and that's the way the system works. So they tend to go vote not for their candidate, they vote against what they consider the lesser of two evils. And of course, every election they get, the two evils get more and more evil, not less evil. I think the last decent US president we had was John F. Kennedy, or semi-decent, and he was assassinated. So we know that that system will not allow the repeat of the John F. Kennedy phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw there was a comment in the chat about just being interested in ecocide or ecocide, and the connection between humans and the land and non-human parts of the environment. I don't know if there's anything else you want to share on that, but I really find hope in the work that you're doing, Dr. Qumsiyeh, and I find inspiration and motivation to keep staying active and keep speaking up and speaking out. I'm more than ever interested in the ecological impacts of war and imperialism and settler colonialism and the ways that that really it strives to erase and erode culture and history and yeah, so I don't know if there's more you want to say on that, but yes.
Yeah, I do want to say that there's a connection between genocide and ecocide at a much deeper level and much higher level also now with climate change and habitat destruction, going rampant around the world, pollution, etc. There's now estimates that there's more plastics in the ocean than there are fish in the ocean. There's the climate change alone is accelerating to a pace where, every year is hotter than the year before, and this is the hottest year in record globally in terms of like ocean surface temperatures and land temperatures recorded. And this climate change and colonization and oppression of people are interconnected. For example, wars are a climate change issue. The biggest producer of greenhouse gases is the military now around the world. And certainly in active conflict zones like Ukraine or Palestine, where the Israeli military alone, there's been a study by the Guardian newspaper with some experts who looked at this back in December, I think, or early January, and they looked at the amount of greenhouse gases emitted by the jets flying over Gaza, bombing Gaza. Just from jet fuel alone in the first 2 months of the genocide of Gaza, Israeli jets produced more greenhouse gases than the Central African Republic produced in a whole year from all its automobiles, industries, kitchens, everything. And certainly now in the 10th month, Israel produced more greenhouse gases probably than France or England produced in a whole year. And again, this is just from jet fuel. I'm not counting the bombings and the fire and the incinerations of people and buildings and agricultural fields and white phosphorus and all this stuff. So these two issues, ecocide and genocide, are acting synergistically and acting together. Basically, that's what the colonizers do. And certainly there's a strong connection between the two. And that's also another reason why, and perhaps we should add it, I mentioned 3 earlier reasons why this genocide is unique. We might add this 4th reason, that the ecocide that's associated with it will no longer be limited to a particular area. It's impacting the whole planet. And so we humans may go extinct either because of nuclear war or because of the climate change, that, or at least not go extinct, but at least reduced in numbers significantly and ending our civilizations as we know it. That could happen by one of 2 things, either climate change or nuclear war, or a combination. I'm leaning towards a combination that's going to happen in the next 5 years, I would estimate. And I give it a probability of about 60% happening. Sorry, as a scientist, I have to give my readings of the situation. It is not an issue of being pessimistic or optimistic or hopeful or anything else. It's a matter of judging based on the variables and the givens that are happening, that we are going into a regional war. We will end up in a global war, which will devastate the rest of our climate. Nobody is even talking about climate anymore. Everybody is talking about fighting Russia and Iran and Palestine, Palestinians killing Palestinians. So I think if we don't wake up as a species, again, no winners and losers in this war. There will be a destruction of our planet, period, end of story. But that is not related to issue of hope. If, hope is something we have to keep. And even though we have 40%, let's say I'm right, 40% probability of success, we should still keep pushing.
Mm-hmm.
And actually push harder because it's so existential for us.
Yes. Yes. Well, I know we're at time, but I want to just thank you so much. It's such a long day for you, but
Yeah,
for making time. Yes.
thank you. And I don't know if there's anybody on the call, I can't tell. If they want to stay in touch, please email me and you can be added to our email list. You can email me at info@palestinenature.org. info@palestinenature.org. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll be in touch and appreciate your time and you sharing with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.